Hello and welcome back to A Squirrel Plays. If you couldn't tell by the super edgy thumbnail, today we're going to be talking a little bit about all those new TTRPGs that are coming our way. What exactly do I mean by that? Well, in an earlier video of mine when talking about the upcoming 1D&D, I made the comment that now would be a good time to put more work into that TTRPG that you always wanted to make. Because most likely there would be a lot of unhappy D&D players out there looking for something new. Then Wizards of the Coast only made my statement more true by releasing the drama that was the OGL fiasco. Long story short, turns out I was a lot more right than I thought I would be. I've seen several people, even within just my own little group, working on their own TTRPG systems, and my socials have been absolutely flooded with other people doing the exact same thing. Now, it is really neat to see everybody working on this stuff, and I love that everybody is just turning their backs to the corporate machine and instead are choosing to flex their own creative muscles. So why the warning? Why all the gloom and doom? What has the squirrel foreseen? Well, maybe not so much as foreseen, but experienced and witnessed multiple times over and can now see it coming a mile away. When something is popular, there's always somebody somewhere that will try to ride the wave and get a piece of the pie. Sometimes they start out with the intention to get into your wallet, and sometimes it comes later once they start getting a taste of the cash. That said, it can be hard to distinguish the good from the bad because the bad pose as the good. And the longer something goes on, the better the bad get at posing as the good. Let's take a look at a couple of video games. One of my favorite games to hate on is Ark. I think a lot of people have forgotten how promising this title looked back in 2015 when it released in early access. It was crazy. It was a game where you could tame and ride dinosaurs. It was wild, man. But what was really pulling people in was the fact that the studio behind it was dropping updates like crazy. We're talking 3, 4, maybe 5 updates in a single day. Granted, not big content updates, but fixes and general tweaks and whatnot to make things better. People thought, finally, a game that's actually getting updated and worked on instead of floating forever in early access. But oh, how silly they were. Let me see if I can speedrun just some of the issues that took place with the game. Within the first year of early access, the studio quickly stopped with the fixes and tweaks and instead started dropping content left and right. People begged and begged for fixes before new content, but the studio completely ignored the feedback and put everything they had into new content, stacking one problem on another. Before the game was finished, they announced the release of a DLC package that continued the story and gave the players another map to play on, complete with new dinos and items. DLC that wasn't even finished for a game that also wasn't even finished yet, that you could pay real money for. When confronted about the scummy nature of this practice, the studio answered by calling their players cheap and unsupportive. This is a true story, by the way. Then another DLC comes out, then a season pass that suggested you could buy it and receive all their DLC in the pipeline. In 2018, 1 year after Ark's 1.0 release, they announced another game called Atlas. The game was nothing more than a reskin of Ark, and by the way, it is still in early access 5 years later as of recording this. However, after 3 DLC packages for Ark, the studio decided to milk it just a little bit more by coming out with 2 more DLC packages to buy and continue the story. However, the first season pass didn't cover those, so you had to buy another season pass or just buy the 2 DLCs separately. Remember, this game started out really promising. Once people were on the hook, the studio ran them all through the dirt and then some. And this is also completely ignoring the legal troubles the studio has been in and out of, including poaching people from other companies and cheating within their own game to sell in-game items for real money. Now, how about this gem called Craftopia? This game promised the world and then some, something for everybody, it said, while trying to copy anything and everything under the sun that had even the slightest chance of tickling somebody's funny bone. Where is it now? Sitting in early access with the promise of big updates coming. Never mind the fact that they announced they started working on a whole other game that looks nearly identical to Craftopia. Almost sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? And then there's the ongoing scam that is Star Citizen, And on the topic of space games, there was the colossal flop that was No Man's Sky. Again, promised the world and delivered next to nothing. 7 years later, in a few close calls with the law, the studio is finally starting to deliver on what they promised. Not the whole thing, but they're getting closer each year. And then there's 7 Days to Die. One day, it will leave early access. Maybe. And yes, I do realize that all these examples I picked could be considered successful. You might say they're just as successful as Wizards of the Coast. But that's video games, you say. Everybody knows that industry is kind of circling the toilet in a sense. While I agree, I would argue it's not much different than much else out there. How many Kickstarter horror stories have you heard? Remember the Ouya console, or however you pronounce it? The Coolest Cooler? Or how about Pebble Time? You know, the one that raised like $20 million and sold everything to Fitbit and left people with a watch that was useless after a year. Good times, man. Scams are everywhere, and TTRPGs are no different. Everybody trusted Wizards of the Coast to do right by them, and, well, look how that turned out. Now, does that mean you should never trust a Kickstarter or support anybody trying to make their own TTRPG? Of course not. If we didn't support one another, then where would we be? I'll tell you where we'd be. We'd be on YouTube making videos that we can't monetize. So subscribe, dang it. So where does that leave us? Companies are willing to take our money and lie by any means necessary to get the job done, and apparently lone individuals can be just as bad. So what does a squirrel do? You read between the lines, or at least you try to. If the Kickstarter looks too good to be true, then it probably is. Or even if the project just sounds like a really cool idea, don't let it sweep you away. Read the whole project plan from top to bottom, front to back, and then read it again, because if you're anything like me, you don't know what the heck you just read. Then after you read that 3 times, snoop around the community if there is one and ask questions. Be nosy, look up the person behind the project and see what kind of track record they have. Are they completely new to the whole thing? Have they been involved in anything else, good or bad? Post in the community and ask directly. If you can, ask the person outright and express your concerns. The response will most likely tell you a lot about who they are. It's okay to have your doubts, especially with the track record that places like Kickstarter have, or video games in early access, or even long-established companies. That doesn't make you a negative Nancy or a pessimist. It makes you not only careful, but wise with your money. I would also recommend following some other YouTubers that dedicate their channels to revealing scams, or at least talking about previously busted scams and going into detail about them. Scott Schaefer just a few months ago dropped a really good video exposing the scam behind established titles. The video exploded and caused quite a big stir, but the video itself and its sequel go into really good detail and show just how much digging he did to look into it. Sometimes the scams are super obvious, and sometimes there's a lot of strings being pulled behind the scenes across multiple people, and it gets really hard to follow. Also, and I realize that this might come across as unsupportive for the community, but if you're looking at a project and just aren't sure, or there's the slightest inkling in the back of your mind that just maybe it's not right, then just don't throw your money at it. It's that simple. You're not going to miss out on anything. If the person really wants to get their product out there and not just take your money, they'll use whatever they got and still try to make it happen. When it gets out there, you can buy it then. It's still supporting them, it's just at a later time. Some people have the money to invest in things that may or may not make it, and some don't. It's up to you to decide which side of the fence you're on. You shouldn't feel bad for what you don't have, and if the person behind the project or if the community itself is making you feel bad for not supporting, well, then that's something you don't want to be a part of anyway. So, shout out to all of these clowns over in the Squirrel Discord working on making their own TTRPGs, and a shout out to all of you out there watching this that are either currently working on one also, or considering it, or maybe you did some work on your own TTRPG for a while and then it fell to the wayside due to life getting in the way. It's never too late to get back into it. And really, guys, that's about all I got for this one. As the old Bob Dylan song goes, the times they are a-changin'. Wizards of the Coast was the big man on campus for a long, long time, and now that they've slipped, they've opened Pandora's box. Some of those out there are going to be after a piece of the pie, and others will simply be a bit more motivated to do what they've been wanting to do for a while. So, Let's help each other out. Let's all be the Chad player at the table. If you know someone working on their own TTRPG, get involved. Be part of the fun that is the creative process. Help them test it out, throw them some ideas, or just cheer them on. The original intent of this channel and the community it would make was for just that. It was meant to be a place where anybody could come forward with their ideas and opinions and be heard without having to worry about being beat into the ground. It was meant to lift one another up, so let's make sure we stick to that goal as things unfold in the TTRPG community. And as always, stay safe and have fun, because that's the most important part of the game.